Good morning, fellow podcasters, YouTubers, Rumblers. All cyber manner of communications exist these days. So I'm here on YouTube, and I wanted to talk about a different Fuller. So if you've been with this channel a bit, I usually say Fuller means Buckminster Fuller. However, another important Fuller had a big role in my particular trajectory, my career. You could call it my careen. I sometimes think career, careen, bouncing off here and there. Bring, remember Ricochet, bullets and cartoons. It's kind of fun. It's kind of fun if gun violence is just confined to like Hanna-Barbera. I don't know if they actually, wait, did Hanna-Barbera ever have, like, Roadrunner is already like too violent for a lot of people. Like anything with dynamite, but Yosemite Sam, of course, Yosemite Sam. He's always shooting off his revolvers. Anyway, I digress. Buckminster Fuller is also part of this, though. But Robert Fuller, Dr. Robert Fuller, was a very prominent teacher of physics in the Midwest, especially. And when I would hang out with people in the Midwest, what really fascinated me was how focused they are on their major sporting events and teams. The intramural university scene, college football. I'm speaking mainly of college football. And it's just a different culture. I'm not passing any kind of moral judgment. I'm fascinated by the Midwest. I love going to Champaign-Urbana, where the University of Illinois has a big campus, and I used to work with a company that was semi-based in that town. It's a very fine place. Great music scene. WEFT, shout out. Anyway, and all across, I got to Decatur, but only briefly. So Dr. Fuller, he noticed me in cyberspace. He's on a lot of listservs, as was I, and I forget exactly which one we were overlapping on at the time, but I started writing about first-person physics, which is like instead of looking over there at pendulums and these things outside your experience, like in showcase museums, like Museum of Science and Industry in Munich, for example, Dusseldorf. Wait, what am I saying? I don't mean to say Deutsche Museum, right? In Munich, all kinds of exhibits of scientific principles, like OMSI here in Portland. And I was fascinated by that type of interactive science, where you could go and push a button and watch an experiment be performed in front of your eyes, like chemistry or something. Anyway, a supplement to that is to like put yourself on a roller coaster or go into a centrifugal force machine, such as we would call the rotor, a theme park, bumper cars. You can take all the rides in a theme park and map them to physics, but they're also a personal experience, like you're getting it. Like flying an airplane. What better way to get a lot about physics, right? And later, thanks to Bob Fuller, I was able to join a list of physics educators, including a prominent um, airplane flying, teach physics through airplane guy. So that was fun while it lasted. I'm still a member, but I got kind of in trouble. And here's why, because I stuck with and developed the idea of energy slaves, which was from Bucky Fuller's time, and there's a comic about it now that I'll have on the screen, and it's like his idea that as industrialization, what is industrialization? What does it do? And it's like for the common human, for people, what we used to, let's just call it the reason there was a big middle class all of a sudden, not nobility, not slave owners, was because appliances and cars and all the energy using devices of our lives kind of are stand ins for what in the old days would have taken any number of slaves to accomplish. In fact, and let's say throw in horses, like to jump in a car and go barreling down the freeway. Think of how many horses that is, and that's Apropos, because we talk about horsepower of an engine and so on. 300 horsepower, 1,000 horsepower, depends, some of these hypercars, supercars, whatever. Trains have horsepower. And one of Fuller's ideas was okay, but who hangs out with horses much anymore? There used to be the golden age. I don't know about golden age for them. They were an exploited underclass of slave labor, the horses. People treated humans much like they treated horses as livestock. Yeah, no, it's all disgusting and all that. Horses should be left to run free in the prairie, in my utopia for horses, right? Wild horses and stuff. But maybe they kind of like being domesticated. I mean, I don't know. Once you're a Clydesdale, I don't know if you want to be turned loose in South Dakota or something. But anyway, I digress. I'm talking about slavery, and I'm talking about how Fuller, Buckminster Fuller now, took this idea of an energy slave and said, look, middle class Joe, you've got all these energy slaves now. You've got like thousands of people, quote unquote, working for you, but in the form of engines. It's all cybernetics. And think of all the secretaries it would take to handle your electronic business, your filing and stuff. You don't even have to go to the bank. Just sitting on your butt, you can pull out your smartphone and use apps and customer service, get stuff delivered, all this automation at your fingertips. That's the energy slave idea. So we're all living like kings now. And Fuller was into that, Buckminster Fuller. I'm mentioning the two because I overlap here. I'm talking about all this stuff on the list. And Bob Fuller, Dr. Robert Fuller, he's lurking there just reading my stuff, and he's going, yeah, first person physics, that has a ring to it. And I can see where Kirby's going with this energy slave stuff and how, instead of horses, Buckminster Fuller said, what about just substitute people? Like, how many people is a horsepower? How many people power is that? Because to get to energy slaves and these sort of epic Cecil B. DeMille or whatever Hollywood pictures of all the slaves that you have working for you when you get in your car, it's better if we could show that as like vast numbers of human slaves. And it's satire. We're making fun in a way. It's like, yeah, they're wearing chains and building your pyramid every day. You, middle class Jill, have a pyramid that you can make every day for yourself, given all those energy slaves. And by pyramid, we mean fossil footprint or whatever output, whatever energy thing you do, drive your car, take elevators, go up escalators. Think of all the slaves it would take to carry you that many floors up those steps. And at that speed, my goodness, I don't think there's a way humans could do it. So that was Bucky's point, and Robert Fuller liked the idea of first person physics, including kind of the theme park stuff and roller coasters and all I was doing in that. And instead of just stealing it as a good idea, which he could have done because I didn't have any copyright or patents or whatever, and then I could have said, wow, he just stole my idea or whatever. Maybe that would have been my attitude. I don't know. I could have not been that way, but I don't know because he decided, no, let's rope Kirby in and give him credit and talk about first person physics and go for an NSF grant. Because he saw megatrends in physics himself from his point of view that maybe I wasn't aware of at all, having to do with how physics was becoming more integrated with healthcare. Like, they were teaching more like, what physics do you need to know if you're going to be a nurse or a doctor, physician's assistant, or any kind of person in healthcare? You've got to know, how the liver works and pressure, tension, all this stuff. All these physics principles converge in biology. And, physics until then had been very engine oriented, very like engine in the sense of steam engine. Physics was, where you kind of like civil engineering in a lot of ways, bridges and tunnels. But it was evolving in Dr. Fuller's experience, Bob Fuller's experience. He was seeing indications that the pedagogy around physics was moving very strongly in the direction of healthcare professionals. In other words, people who take physics not because maybe they're going to be professional physicists, but they have a certain physics requirement. There's a certain amount of physics they need to take in the university in order to fulfill their professional dreams, which have to do with healthcare more likely than being a pure physicist, which is a very rarefied field. Not that he wasn't into that, but as a university level professor with kind of a reputation for pioneering pedagogy, he could not afford to just focus on what he calls, well, he put a lot of his focus on what he called second tier, which doesn't really mean second rate. It means people coming through the physics department who aren't physics majors, but nevertheless have a need for physics. That's like second tier. And what kind of education should they have? How much vectors? How much this, how much that? It's a different mix. It's a different, like, curriculum, you could say. And it's not just watered down so much as retrofitted with different concepts, different approaches. And first person physics looked like, given as a first person, that's when you get ill and stuff. You also get that in the first person experience, dengue fever, or whatever you have, right? So it keeps it very up close and personal as well, these ideas. And that's where you're in a doctor mode, and even if you're self-treating, you pay a lot of attention to so-called symptoms, so-called. In other words, I don't have to get into all that. I'm just saying physics could have a subjective feel to it more than it does. And I think Bob Fuller was really open to that. And he just had me on the team as a web person, the webmaster. And, I had enough web skills to write me into the grant, as it wouldn't have been a major thing because I wasn't a physics professor. So when he flew me out to, where do I go? Lincoln, Nebraska, it was to meet with other true physics professors who really were going to be the core content providers of first person physics. Kirby was there, me, because I had web skills and I had a lot of interest in first person physics as a meme. And I was running with it. So when Bob came to Portland sometimes, because he had other reasons also to be out here occasionally, he got around, we would go out and he got to be in the Pauling house, and, we would hang together and talk, right? I was one of the people on his list, even though he had other reasons to be out here. That's true with quite a few people. I'm on the list, their list, and not just me, right? So we had a good time, and we would update each other on these kind of issues. How it was going with the grant. Ultimately, we almost got it, you could say, squeaked by not getting it, reapplication possible. But Bob Fuller passed away somewhat unexpectedly to me. And so I've still got the momentum there, but I don't have a strong relationship to his network. Roger, let's see, it was Car Plus. Car Plus. This guy, he's kind of like the Caleb Gattegno of physics. He decides to take his really strong physics background and really focus on kids and pedagogy and early physics and how do you lay the proper groundwork and foundation for a science curriculum and all these questions. Caleb Gattegno did this with mathematics a lot, especially with those colored rods we talk about. What are those called again? Cuisenaire rods and stuff. So what I'm saying is, like Bob Fuller, um, the focus was not so much like theoretical research, breakthrough physics, like how do we explain the W boson mass and stuff like this, that he would track and be a consumer of and understand and prepare his students to read about. But he was really focused on that, exactly that, pedagogy. You could say the web itself was a physics invention pointing at pedagogy. In other words, Tim Berners-Lee at CERN is trying to help the physics community keep it all tied together in their own minds where they can jump around between all these papers that are pouring out of CERN, and they need to be hyperlinked. They need to be seen and read in light of one another for the principles to shine through, you could say. So that's what the hypertext and hyper well, the whole evolution of that kind of the World Wide Web, the whole evolution of those kinds of documents that all link. It's kind of in the heading under the heading of library science as well. Where physics meets library science is hypertext. And I've been into that a lot. Like hypertext has been a big deal for me. So you could say I'm jumping into physics from two diving boards, one being Buckminster Fuller's energy slave synergetics concepts, and another being from the library science side of things, looking through the lens of hypertext and how documents, how file retrieval, mental spatial data management, and going back through the memory palace tradition, mnemonics, The Art of Memory by Francis Yates, those kind of books very relate to the concept of hypertext in today's world. And going forward, I would say, into the brave new world of VR and all that, or AR, whatever they want to call it, augmented reality, Pokemon. So I guess I'll end on that note and just say I got to fly out to Lincoln, Nebraska, hang out with the physics community, give a couple presentations, and really have a good time looking at physics over the shoulder of Robert Fuller, who also invited me to Association of American Physics Teachers, AAPT, a conference at the Hilton here in Portland, Oregon. I was his guest. I got to sit in on talks, again, rub shoulders with the teachers, physics teachers. So through Bob Fuller, I had a lot of entree. But then I kind of got in trouble because the energy slave idea is too sensitive, touchy. And I was like kind of throwing it around some more in the physics teacher community. And without Bob there to protect me, what if I was going to go off the rails at a time when it's very sensitive, these topics? Because of American history, because of slavery, because of the twisted past, and because the university is kind of a crucible for all these sort of feelings in chemistry that it could flare up at any time and so on and so forth. It's like I'm an outsider throwing around words like energy slave. I'm not in the classroom. I don't know what's going on. So let's encourage Kirby to shut up, which Kirby did on that list, right? I still talk about all this stuff, but in other contexts, like on this YouTube channel. So that's the history. I hope that was entertaining for you. And if you knew Bob Fuller, please be in touch. I was at a memorial service for him here in Portland. I think it was part of an AAPT, or maybe not. In any case, you may have seen me and wondered, well, what was my relationship to any of this? I actually doubt anyone will have any memory of that, but it was great being in the Hilton here that time. And my best wishes. Oh, I'm still in touch with some physics teachers too because of other connections and stuff. It's just my network through Bob Fuller, I feel, got kind of curtailed by his unexpected passing. All right, I'll talk to you guys in the near future. Bye bye. So, if you're still here, this is how we used to do the ISEP lectures. The audience would go home, but those who were with the Wanderers would go to the Heathman nearby, fancy restaurant. Actually, what were we? We were in an area served by the Heathman, but more connected to the theater itself. And then later we moved to a nearby church. I'm talking about where the ISEP lectures occurred. Why am I talking about ISEP? Well, there's another connections I had to Portland's sort of academic and physics community, how I got to rub shoulders with a lot of the luminaries of our day who would come through here on this lecture series. And I think Bob Fuller, who I'm talking about, was aware that I had those connections kind of going, but also what we discovered as time went on was another connection. I learned that Bob Fuller, in his early days, when he was trying to decide if he wanted to go into a religious discipline as kind of a Methodist, maybe. I don't know. I don't know. He was thinking about going to seminary or theological academy of some kind, like it was up for grabs, or did he want to go into the sciences? And he really made up his mind, he told me, during his time teaching in Burma, right? Myanmar today. And he'd gone over there as a young guy, kind of to search for himself, in other words, to figure out what he wanted to do with his life. And let's just, shake things up a bit and go to Burma and teach there. And that's where he met the famous Aung San Suu Kyi, right, as his student, and I think she was like a sixth grader and so on. So ever since then, having known her then and so on, and also bringing American ideas of democracy and freedom. In other words, his role in that school, I guess you could say, is probably even unconsciously, you could say, to role model how it is to be, what it is to be an idealist in an American context, right? Because teachers are like that. They're expansive about the future. They share wholeheartedly with their students a lot. And depending on your background, you're going to shine through a lot of your ethnicity, whatever that might be. Anyway, I think Bob felt he had been an early influence, and she had such an amazing but also difficult path, if you know that whole story. So he consciously edited and connected together materials about her, and I think that would he would be totally engaged in that. What's going on in Burma would be his focus. If he were still here, I would probably be it would be him and I would be talking about that more. And there's other connections there, other connections. So we got to know each other better over time and found these things that connected us that we hadn't really realized were there from the start. And that was pretty interesting. All right. So that was my little, for those who stayed and wanted to watch the rest of the show, little, because I listened and, oh, one more thing. What did I do concretely with Bob Fuller in terms of physics? Well, he was really into, how they do in Hollywood when they have like Gollum in Lord of the Rings, how they animate him, right? Famous actor puts on all these little sensors around his body and acts out as a golem. And then it gets rendered as this ridiculous creature, right? And that whole thing involves data and XYZ coordinates in space of where all those little sensors are on a body so you can map it to a puppet simulation, map it to a cyber puppet, you could say, an avatar, a golem, whatever. And so Bob Fuller was playing with that kind of stuff. He had access to those kind of facilities in the Midwest. And he knew that I had POV ray skills, rendering skills. So he's like, let's send Kirby these giant XYZ spreadsheet things where I get all the sensor data. And I'll put that in POV ray and I'll actually have it trace out. These like stick figures are just going to like kick a soccer ball, or we had a ballerina do, classic moves. Forget all the experiments, but Bob would send them to me, the output, and I would send back these movies where the stick figures would do what, a golem would do, right? So it was all very, the thing is I was doing it open source and we included that source code. It was Python. And, how do you go all the way from a spreadsheet like this to POV ray output? And it would be a very esoteric kind of thing to be sharing at an AAPT conference. But the way he did it was everyone in their swag bag got a free CD. Remember CD-ROMs and stuff. So everybody got a CD-ROM in the conference that had at least some of that animation going, and in a subfolder somewhere, I think, had all the source code for doing it. and you one out of 500 would probably even look at that right at all, or maybe word spreads and then someone says, well, just look at your disc, the thing you got at the conference. There's more about the Python right there, and you go, oh, okay, thanks, I didn't know that, and stuff like that. So anyway, those were two additional things I wanted to tack on at the end. And again, thank you for listening.